All right, we're going with this. Ralph, I got to adjust your camera because you're all out of the picture now. Somehow we lost Dan. Dan is here, but we don't have his... All right, we're going with this. Ralph.
Yeah, I don't know why you don't
adjust
have
your camera because you're all out of the audio picture now. Somehow we lost Dan. Ralph, Dan is here. This is but we don't have his... All right, we're going with this. Ralph.
Yeah, I don't know why you don't have my
camera because you're all out of the audio picture now. Somehow we lost Dan. Dan is here. This is but we don't have his... All right, we're going with this. Ralph.
Yeah, I don't know why you don't have my
camera because you're all out... Hold on. I got to figure out how to fix this camera now. Everything was just lined up to be great, and then about 30 seconds in, Dan disappeared, but we can still hear him. Dan, are you still there? Wait, we don't hear Dan at all now. Dan? Dan? Uh-oh. Something happened. There! Dan's back! Hey! Only problem is...
Can you see me now?
Dan is Ralph now. Okay. Ralph, sign off and then sign back in real quick. Can you do that for me? All right. Now Dan is full screen. All right, Ralph. We're going to have Ralph sign back in, and then I think we're going to be good. I hope we're going to be good. Otherwise, I got to figure these camera things out real quick. But, man, the production already is better, despite all this. I'm just waiting for Ralph to
I hit refresh. It seemed to fix the problem.
Dan is here, though, folks. As you can see, this is like behind-the-scenes action at the baseball show. It is Wednesday, December 6th. And there we go. And it's fixed. We are good to go. We are fixed. I hope everybody's enjoying this. All right, so as you guys can see, we got Dan Szymborski, who is on the show with us this evening. We're going to get into the Zips projection model he came up with. We're going to talk to him about his take on some players. Ralph, you know, I have a couple of lines I wrote out about how confident I am tonight. I'll get back to that in a minute, as long as this doesn't fail in the next 30 seconds. But first and foremost, you are watching the baseball show on Fantrax. Please subscribe to the channel. Please give us a like. Throw us a thumbs up. It will make a difference for us. We do appreciate it. Don't forget to check out the Fantrax games. We're going to be giving out stuff like free entries into the $50 track stuff. Buy a RotoWear shirt like this one. Kenneth Cashman is doing a great job at RotoWear. He's got some new shirts coming out. Ralph's got one on, of course, as well. Buy one for someone you love or even for yourself for this Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, holiday season. There's something out there for everybody. Of course, the Crab Army. I have a question for people. It's on my poll everywhere, Facebook, Twitter. How would you feel about a best ball style baseball game? Leave a yes or a no in the comments. What else? There was a Twitter saga today that ensued. Apologize to all those that were traumatized by it. It did lead to...
Sorry, Cubs fans.
It did
Sorry,
lead
Cubs
to the,
fans. I love all of you.
It led to the introduction of the bullhorn, so I can try to keep Ralph in check here. But we're going to get into Ohtani. We're going to get into Stanton. We're going to get into the Zips projections. We're going to get into all of this stuff and more tonight. So hopefully, you know, like I said, this is working out. And let's bring Dan in.
Do it. Bring him on. I look creased, baby. Creased. Creased and greased.
All right. Well, while Ralph was talking, we had a little extra promo going there. I don't know if you saw the crab dancing. But Dan, welcome to the baseball show. You are our first guest with the new production team of myself. So hopefully you can bear with us, as is some people in the audience. I was going to say, though, I was more confident coming into tonight than the Santa Barbara Sheriff was in Corey Feldman's back in the 90s. I was more confident than Theo Epstein was in Jose Quintana. I was more confident than Jeff Lunhow was in Mark Appel. But Dan, how are you feeling about
I'm doing pretty well. You shouldn't be that confident if I'm involved, because I tend to screw up this production stuff pretty well. Right now I have a camera kind of balanced on books just to get the right height. And I have cats all over here. This could all just crash down in like a minute.
Well, so far so good. So maybe we should jump into the heavy lifting before. I know Ralph had some questions for you. I want Ralph to be able to say something, because I feel like I'm talking all over him as usual. But Ralph, you go ahead and start asking our guest tonight some of the questions you have laid out.
Thank you, Andy. I'm actually going to be able to ask some questions this week. We had Jake Faria on last week of the Tampa Bay Rays, and Andy stole all my questions. So that's the reason he's giving me the lead in this week, Dan.
Well, you can ask me his questions, and I might not know the answer, but I can lie. I mean, lying is part of media. We had to make some fake news.
Yeah, pretty much. Absolutely. I mean, we couldn't produce anything without it being slightly fake news. Though we'll get into Murray Chass in a little bit, who thinks you are particularly fake news.
My buddy.
And in particular, your Zips projection. So I kind of wanted to go into that a little bit, because obviously that's, one of the things you're predominantly known for. And really, what's sort of the genesis story, the origin story of Zips? How did it come about? What was it you were first doing? And then I guess, maybe we can get into some of the things you might have tweaked over time.
Well, we want like the super long version or the long version or kind of the middle version. I won't do the super expanded version.
The
TV
friendly version.
It's your call. We have at least 40 minutes left. So.
A friend of mine named Chris Dial. Chris is a super smart chemist. He's down in North Carolina. He's on Saber's board of directors at the moment. We used to talk about, this was like 96, 97, 98. We used to say, hey, there weren't a lot of projection systems that were public at the time. It was mostly just kind of the refuge of fantasy writers. You saw them in fantasy, kind of those preview books with all the projections. And Baseball Prospectus, of course, had their system. I forget if it was Wilton or Vlad at the time, but they had their own projection system. And we talked together and said, what if we did a basic projection system that gets us most of the way there? That's kind of how it started. Tom Tango did this kind of concept later with Marcel, but we never actually got around to doing that. So a few years ago, I was blogging for Baseball Primer, and I was writing about transactions, and I thought maybe I'd revisit it. Vorush McCracken's research on dips and how batting average on balls in play influenced, the predictability of that number and how it affected ERA long term. That was kind of news. So I wanted to kind of implement some of that new data into a model, and that's why Zips rhymes with dips, because it started out as Szymborski projection system to go along, and I changed it from Stips to Zips. And then I, made the I little and the S. It was little the first time because of California Highway Patrol, because when I was a kid, I loved that and Dukes of Hazzard. So
Sure.
If I had thought of a Dukes of Hazzard reference, it might be a very different name right now. It might be something General Lee related, and then I'd really be in trouble now. But as it grew, it never really was the simple projection system that we had kind of talked about at first. As computers became more powerful, I moved that from a Pentium 4 to successive computers that could do a lot more. Zips right now, it wouldn't even fit on the hard drive of my computer at the time. So it's become more complex over time. We have a lot more data available that just wasn't available 15 years ago. And so I incorporate as much of the new information as I can every year, and I'm pretty careful about it because I don't want to break anything.
Okay.
And that was actually one of the follow-up questions I was going to ask you, was sort of how have you started to incorporate StatCast data and some of that stuff that's, started to be collected in terms of, exit velocities and those sort of measurables that weren't available to us, years ago. Are there certain ones you trust to versus other stuff that maybe you don't trust as much?
Well, you always start by not trusting anything. That's always step one, is anything that you see that's new, you have to distrust until it proves itself that you can actually trust it. I have two primary concerns. One is always the availability. I don't want to rely on data that I might not be able to get in future years, because that would kind of mess things up. And two, I'm very cautious because you don't have a lot of test data when you're running a model for projecting major league players. I mean, there's cross testing and stuff, but there's only so much you can do in that vein. The fact is, that you don't have that many seasons to put against your projections. So I implement things very slowly. Some of the velocity and hit ball data is only working its way really into this year's version. I always have a version that's kind of 3 or 4 years out that I don't kind of move up in the ranking until I'm pretty sure it's an improvement. So it's a cautious process. You have to do a lot of nitty gritty proving the predictive value of data, and that's a lot of digging and work and testing and a lot of failing and a lot of more failing, because you fail a lot when you do that kind of thing. Something you think, oh, that's gonna be really cool. Like, no, it's not.
Right. Well, I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to steal one of Ralph's questions. Maybe he'll steal one of mine from our list here. But he's obviously Prospect Jesus, as you can see from the Twitter handle, and people, follow him all over the world for his prospect takes. What factors into the minor league profile for you? What carries the most weight for prospects? And then there is a follow-up that Ralph will get into with that, but as far as your projections. But when you're looking at prospects who obviously the sample size isn't against major leaguers, what carries the most weight for you?
Well, age, of course, is extremely important. I mean, obviously all prospect mavens know that, but it really shows up in the statistics. You have a guy at 19 versus a guy at 21 at the same level. Their predictive value, the predictive of that age, it's pretty significant. Probably the most work I had to do was simply going back with minor league data. For 45 years now, I have minor league data. So I've had to do a lot of work as to what leads to what, how do prospects react to, say, extreme parks like in Albuquerque or when they played for the Denver Bears, things like that. You have to it's the same thing when you're projecting major leaguers. You have to kind of dig in, just see what has relevance to the future and what's just noise, because the noise you have to throw out for your model. Some things that people get excited about in the majors, like a guy who walks a lot, it isn't really as important for a prospect. You see a lot of those high walk, low isolated power, low other skill guys. You see a lot of those guys just kind of burn out as they get up to the top of the minors, like Jackie Rexroad and what was that catcher for the White? Mark Johnson.
Yep.
You see those guys. People say, "Well, 410 on base percentage." Like, no, he has a 410 on base percentage and a 340 slugging percentage for AAA. He's not going to have a 410 on base percentage, and things like that are pretty important. You discover as you go on as time. Something else is people kind of over exaggerate the effect of minor league strikeouts. I think a classic case of this is Chris Bryant. People would tell me that his projection for his rookie year is too high. He struck out a lot, and I tell them that the strikeouts aren't really that big a deal, because the thing is, when you're slugging 600 or 700 in the minors, you are incentivized to be aggressive at the plate. You don't want to be Ben Grieve. You don't want to be excessively cautious. And so that's one thing I've learned a lot from working with minor league translations that I've done over the years. That something like strikeouts, it's just not that big a deal. I mean, there's a limit. When you go kind of that Matt Raleigh danger zone where you're striking out half the time and hitting 170, but I think people tend to overestimate just how bad that is for a player's future, and so I guess that answers my run on that. My run-on answer, I think, gets the question.
Oh, that's fine. That's fair.
I keep going. I sometimes have to be told to stop.
Well, you'll fit in perfectly with me. We'll just keep talking over.
Same here. It's perfect. It's perfect. Well, I was going to ask too, in terms of how much do you put into perspective, say, a particular league and the park factors and whatnot in minor leagues when you start to sort of project out some of these numbers, power numbers, or whatever have you?
Well, generally you have to normalize it, because the minor leagues have very different home run environments.
Sure.
Very different run environments, wide to wide. The Pacific Coast League, of course, is always a notorious high offense league compared to some of the other leagues. You look in the low minors and like power numbers are just terrible, but a lot of that is also just because of the players, that the talent depth isn't there. So there's some techniques to work with that. Really, it's just a lot of empirical research, because essentially everything we know about how a minor league player will react going up the ladder, it's all empirical. There's no like test data. You can't put anybody in a beaker or in an experiment. All we know is just what's happened. Right. So really, it's just seeing how X, Y, Z, and all the other players go from, say, the Eastern League to the International League over time, and right. That's pretty much how it works.
All right. Well, I'm gonna change the subject from baseball for a little bit, because you have a huge Twitter following, and people that know you on Twitter know that you create characters in WWE 2K. So I wanted to ask you two questions about that. I wanted to ask you, how long does it take you to create one of these characters, and do you have anybody already on your agenda to work on next?
Usually I wait until someone does a bad free agent signing or gets in a fight. I'd like to try to get a player for each team so I can do a Royal Rumble in January. kind of a baseball player role, because you have 30 teams and you have 30 entrants in the Royal Rumble. It takes me a couple hours now. It depends on the player. When I first started, it was kind of tricky because I hadn't done it yet. There's a lot of tricks you need to learn with WWE 2K games. You have to learn how to kind of take someone's face and kind of stretch it out, like Face Off. It's like the same thing you have with like stretch it out and blend it so it works well in a video game. And I have like these weird, horrid masks of players. I'll send you one after this. They're pretty frightening when you look at them, but they map onto the video game face properly. And then I have to kind of extract all like, the little uniform parts, all the little stripes and all the patches and stuff. And it the first time it took me 4 or 5 hours because I hadn't done it before. Now I could do it in about an hour or two. Usually while I'm doing something else, because I'm a writer. I have to multitask a lot. Blend the goofing off with the work.
Got it. Well,
I actually work. People are like, "Do you ever work?" I'm like, "I do occasionally do some things."
Occasionally, but you're doing a lot.
Yeah, I am a bigger goof off, or a larger goof off than average, but I do occasionally write things and work on things.
Well, I would say you for sure could go at your own pace because you have carved out a nice reputation for yourself, and you have a ton of people following you because of your work. Which leads me to my next question, which is back to your Zips model, and I wanted to know: would you be kind enough to do a projected model for myself and for Prospect Jesus over there if we gave you some honest opinions on what we thought our skills would grade out to, on the 20 to 80 scale?
See, I see Zips. Scouting data is great. It's hard to put it into a model. Zips mostly works for statistics. I do have a little tool I developed to actually parse scouting reports for defensive information, because defensive statistics in the minors, it's a bunch of rot. If you could give me some real or made up high school statistics, I could probably do something. Okay. It won't be very good. It'll be sub Tebow.
Well, I can tell you, I can't promise we can get it listed on Fangraphs or any other sites like that, but I'm pretty sure we could get it listed on Fantrax. So Ralph and I might be available in the player pool, and maybe even some of these best ball leagues that I'm trying to build and promote. But Ralph, did you have any more questions for Dan personally? Because I know people tuning in and watching want to hear some takes on the Ohtani update and Giancarlo Stanton as well. But it's not every day we get a guy like Dan on the show with us. So did you have any other questions you wanted to ask him in regards to just background?
Yeah, if anything I wanted to really get into with him was some of the Hall of Fame conversations, and then of course the long running dispute with one Murray Chas.
The Hall of Fame season. The Hall of Fame season is what sets me off the most. It's if I ever stroke out during a Twitter conversation, it'll be during a Hall of Fame based conversation. People tell me, "Hey Dan, you shouldn't care at this point. It's just the Hall of Fame. It doesn't really matter if Mike Mussina doesn't get a plaque in the room." I'm like, "Yes, it does. It matters so much." And I tried to tell myself it doesn't. And people will tell me, I think, it wasn't Jay Jaffe. Some writer was telling me, might have been Paul Sporer, actually. But he was not important. He was telling me, "God, you have to calm down about it on Twitter. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. Just kind of write off the Hall of Fame." But I can't, and I get mad because I love baseball. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't love baseball. And I want there to be an honor for the best players in history, the ones I've seen, the ones I haven't seen. I want there to be an honor that kind of is worthy of giving them. Because, everything worth doing is worth doing right. What's the point of having a Hall of Fame if you're going to have an arbitrary, capricious organization running it? I voted for the Cy Young in the NL this year. And, I was pretty sure I knew who I was going to win, but I spent a whole day going through the numbers, narrowing it down to 15 pictures, actually ranked 15 before I put the final 5 on my ballot. Because if you have a responsibility to do something, just do it. Just do something. Just be an adult about it.
Right.
Because, you see a lot of the Hall of Fame guys. They're just like, "Oh, well, he didn't feel like a Hall of Famer, so he didn't have to feel for me. So I took like a minute and a half." I'm like, dude, just give up your vote. Yeah,
it's super.
It's story short. Hall of Fame makes me very angry. I keep a running tally of my Hall of Fame meltdowns every fall.
All right.
Well, let me ask you: Are you a Larry Walker guy? Do you think Larry Walker?
Yeah, of course I'm a Larry Walker guy. There are about 13 or 15 guys that should be in the Hall of Fame now. So right now, I think the scenario that would make me happy, not the best case scenario. I mean, the best case scenario, you'd have 13 guys getting in and say, okay, we had to put all these guys in 1 year because we screwed up. That's not going to happen. But I think the best case for me, realistically, would be we get 4 guys in. I don't even care which 4, as long as they're deserving, and enough votes for Scott Rowland, Andrew Jones, and Johan Santana to stay on the ballot. Santana's not, so that scenario's out. But I think Rowland and Jones have a pretty okay shot at least making the 5%. They each already have 4 votes, I think, in Ryan Thibodeau's tally.
All right, well, let's transition into some of the news that everybody's just hovering over Twitter and Reddit and social media for, and that of course is Shohei Ohtani. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I butcher American names, let alone Asian ones. So I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. But this guy is said to be able to change the face of baseball because he's the first dominant two-way player since maybe Babe Ruth. I mean, it's getting a little preposterous. We saw the 80 grade speed come out. It's been kind of levied back somewhere between 65 and 80. The guy can definitely hit. Nobody's saying he can't. He can pitch. We've seen, the GIFs. We've seen what he can do. 102-mile-an-hour fastball, everything like that. I have kind of I don't want to say real problem, but I have a little bit of a issue with the way he attacked this whole free agency thing. Now, maybe you can say, if you were in his shoes, you'd want to do it the same way. Maybe, I don't know. I have a little arrogance to me, but I think I'm also humble at the same time. But to have 30 teams and tell me why you want me. Tell me what you're going to do for me. I thought that was a little telling about his character, and it's revealing what we see with athletes' characters. And it's always hindsight when they do something. We go, oh, do you remember he did this? Do you remember he did that? The reason I bring all this up is because it's now been narrowed down to 7 teams. And today's favorite is the Padres, which nobody saw coming, especially because they're an NL team. So I'm going to let Ralph handle this one first because he got into a whole war today on Twitter, and I want him to get some
Yeah, I saw
out.
that.
But I'm then going to let you weigh in with this as well, Dan, and what your take is with Ohtani. So, Ralph, give me your Ohtani take, if you would.
In what regard? Where do I think he's going to land, or what do I think he's going to end up being?
Well, Texas was who you originally picked, right? And they are still in the running, which kind of made sense to me. But if you read in the tea leaves, it seems more and more and more like San Diego is starting to emerge as the who's going to wind up landing him. So I guess what's your take with where he lands, and where do you think he should land? And then I'll ask Dan, because he had a projection for him, which was actually the first projection that anybody had to kind of go off of. So then we'll let Dan talk about that. But what's your take on where Ohtani goes and why?
So I'll just put it out there that I'm seeing in the chat right now that the Mariners just traded for extra money. That's pretty telling. There's obviously a great chance the Mariners are probably going to sign him. I know they were probably – I said they were probably second. I was feeling the Giants early on because it seemed like they came out of nowhere. They weren't really in the conversation very much, and all of a sudden they ended up a finalist, and it just seemed, too perfect the Giants would land Stanton and Ohtani. I'm obviously a huge A.J. Preller fanboy. I love Preller. I love what he's done with the team. Flip prospects to major league players. They weren't able to compete. He cashed it in and he upgraded those prospects. And the team is one of the best up-and-coming farm systems. That was the whole point. I said that he was savvy. I didn't say that he was the best GM. That's why I would love to see them land Ohtani. For me, I think that'd be a great landing spot just from the sense of the ballpark. I don't know about hitting, but I do think that he's potentially maybe better in the National League because he can be used on and off, more or less as a pinch hitter, pinch runner. Maybe they can get him into more games and not necessarily start him other than when they're in AL parks. But I think ultimately it sounds like he's going to land in Seattle. I don't know if that's such a bad place for him to land. It's obviously a good market. There's obviously they've already had Ichiro Suzuki there, so there's some history as well. And it's a market that obviously is, I believe, heavily populated by Japanese. So maybe he's comfortable there, and if that's where he ends up going, and Jerry Dipoto is able to land this deal, that would be rather amazing.
Yeah, I didn't want to cut you off while you were talking, but
I just kept talking.
No, because it was good stuff, but we lost Dan's picture again, which threw off the.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, which threw off the cameras. So we heard you, but then we lost everything else. So
you still don't. You don't see me.
I don't
right
see
now.
you. I hear you.
Okay, I'm actually going to hit refresh again. It might kick me off for a minute.
All right,
but
I'll tell you what. Let's take a break while we're doing that. We'll be right back, folks. We'll be right back. I promise. We're getting better. We're figuring out what our errors are and where to improve on them. So hopefully the production is going better this week. We're going to take a short break, and there you have it. We are back, and apologies for that delay to all of you watching. We had a little audio, or not audio, obviously video problem with one of the cameras, and then it just threw everything out of whack. So there you go. We're still working it out. We can alleviate all of these problems if anybody wants to sponsor the show and pour some money into this, because this is coming to you out of our hard-earned sweat and tears. But anyway, let's move on. We were talking about Ohtani. Ralph was giving his take on where he thinks he's going to land, and then I was going to ask Dan about his thoughts on how he projects. So let's just jump right back into that, so then we can get into the Giancarlo Stanton updates and news. But Dan, how do you think Ohtani projects, and should he concentrate on just pitching or hitting, assuming pitching is the way to go?
Well, he projects as a 3 or 4 win pitcher, and as an offensive player, he doesn't project as a superstar or anything. But the nice thing about pitchers and hitting is that even being a mediocre outfield in offensive wise makes you an amazing pitcher. Whenever we talk about amazing offensive pitchers, they're like guys with 600 OPSs maybe. He can do better than that. He has a 750 OPS. He's not a huge benefit in the outfield, but pitching with that kind of offense, it adds a lot of value. You look at, say, Red Ruffing's career stats, or Wes Farrell. They added a lot with the bat, and Ohtani's that kind of player. Just to go back 1 second to when we're talking about kind of the pageant to recruit Ohtani, I think this is a kind of a special case because in most free agent situations, there's the ability for teams to differentiate from each other with money, and they can't do that in this point. Ohtani, he is taking a big risk by coming to the United States because he doesn't get that signing, he doesn't get that posting fee his old team does. If he came here in 2 years, if he were a free agent right now, he'd easily make $150 million. No questions. I'm confident. But he's giving that up. He's taking a risk. He's going to make his signing bonus, and then he enters the whole cost-controlled salary arbitration system for 6 years before he really gets a full stab at free agency. So in that situation where he's coming over from Japan, risking a lot of money, and teams can't differentiate themselves on how much money they give him, then it makes sense for him to look at some of these other things. How would you use me? How does he feel about the place? Because that's his only way of choosing from one team to another, other than just saying this team is better than that team. So in this case, I think the whole dog and pony show is appropriate just because of the contours of the situation.
Okay.
Going back to the pick. Oh, sorry,
No, keep going.
I'll hit it back to you for the next question. So
keep
I'm
going.
not just talking for 10 minutes.
No, you're the guest. This is an honor to have you on. So you talk as long as you want. I was just going to say my initial jump was because you said 3 or 4 pitcher, and I was hearing it as 3 to 4 wins. But yes, definitely 3 to 4.
Oh, yeah, 3 or 4 wins above replacement.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not. I'm not projecting him to go 3-12 next year. That would not be a good. Well, for the Orioles, it still might be, but that's.
I'm going to ask you a fantasy-related question, and I put this poll up because I was kind of surprised at how much Alex Bregman was on a roller coaster in 2017. Ralph and I both loved him entering the season. We thought he was kind of unfairly treated based on, in dynasty leagues at least, and how he was getting pushed, behind Swanson and Brendan Rodgers. And then he merged. He bounced out of a slump in 2017 as people were dropping him and jumping off the bandwagon. And the reason I ask you this and I put the poll up is because he's the same age as Ohtani, and everybody's clamoring over Ohtani like he's, everybody's got to have him. And I put the poll up, and I was surprised that it came back nearly 3-1 that people would prefer Bregman over Ohtani. So I ask you, if you had a choice in fantasy, dynasty especially, who would you rather have between Bregman and Ohtani?
It's pretty close. I think it actually, if we're talking Dynasty League, I think it actually depends a lot on where my team is. I think Bregman is safer than Ohtani. And if I'm a team that's competitive right now and going for the money, there's a pretty good argument for taking Bregman over Ohtani, because you kind of know what you're going to get with Bregman more than you for Ohtani. Because Ohtani, the problem for a fantasy player is a team that signs him can choose between how they use him and how they don't. They can say, okay, you're a pitcher only, or you're a pitcher and you'll hit a little bit, or you're a pitcher and you're going to get 75 innings or 75 games in the outfield. Right. A major league team can make that decision. A fantasy owner cannot make that decision. They're at the mercy of whatever his team chooses to do. So that adds just an element of risk that the actual team doesn't have. So in that case, I get Bregman. But if I'm a team that's kind of, my assets aren't that great, I'm trying to rebuild, I think you go for the home run, because a player like Ohtani can be, I think his upside is better than Bregman's, especially with Bregman. You don't know how long, qualification rules position. If you could get him to be a shortstop every single year forever, that'd be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And it might make him more valuable than Ohtani in any case. But there's this other guy at shortstop for the Astros, might have heard of him. Then he kind of keeps Bregman from that ever happening, like as a definite kind of thing. It's funny. Bregman is one of the players last year. You were talking about his slow start. That I get when I do like my weekly chat for Fangraphs with the Fangraphs guys. There's always this segment of usually the fantasy players panic the most in April. And you get so many panicked questions in April from people. Is this player done forever? And you're like, no, stop. So I'll just answer like all those questions with April, and people hate me for that. And it's the same with guys who have like the short cup, like the small cups of coffee. I remember when George Springer came up, and he went like 6 for 50, and you get like those April questions that are like, is he a bust as a prospect now? And you're like, no, I'm trying to be really nice, but April. So it was the same thing with Bregman. He had that slow start. I had people saying, is Alex Bregman a bust? I'm like, no, I'm trying not to say you're stupid, but you kind of are.
You're right. All right. Well,
and that's something I constantly deal with. Like as a prospect writer, as soon as a guy comes up and he doesn't produce right away, automatically he's a bust, and I'm getting yelled at. And why didn't you rate this guy who's like a fifth starter who's 25 who just got called up? Why aren't you boosting this guy up versus so and so? So yeah, it's one of those brutal things with prospects too, that people are just constantly thinking that the product is finished like as soon as they come up to the majors, and that's never the case.
Well,
yeah, it's one. I'm lucky that I can cast kind of a wide umbrella since I cover a lot of different topics. I always feel sorry sometimes for some of the beat guys, because the beat guys, first, they work harder than I ever do, because they're muscling it out. They're there at 1 a.m. in a 12-3 game trying to squeeze out a quote. But when you deal with one team, you're going to hear a lot of the same questions over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I would probably just slightly go insane if I got the same question over and over again. So I'm fortunate that when something gets a little I don't want to talk about, I can just move to something else completely.
Well, that was actually a perfect segue, because we are going to move to something else entirely. And that, of course, is Giancarlo Stanton. We're going to fly through this because there's really nothing. I mean, there's a ton you could say, and there's nothing at all you could say at the same time. But I did want to get to 3 players and any questions that anybody in the chat room has for Dan, Ralph, or myself. So just jumping into Giancarlo real quick, it seems to be that he and Ohtani are the holdups for the hot stove really bubbling and boiling over. It also seems to be coming down to the Cardinals or the Giants that he's going to sign with. I personally believe the Cardinals can offer a much better prospect package, but the Giants seem intent on giving up basically their entire farm system and paying all of the contract. And if that's the case, then Jeter is proven to be shrewd. But my question to both of you, and Ralph, I'm going to let you start with this again, is my question is, are the Giants out really just bidding against themselves at this point, or do you feel like the Cardinals or even the Dodgers are still involved in the mix? Is it the Giants or bust? And is Stanton definitely not going back to Miami?
Yeah, I don't think Stanton's going back to Miami, and I think that's been the prerogative really of that ownership group ever since Jeter and the folks that have bought the team with him have taken over. They wanted to move that contract, and they seem like they want to move that contract at any means necessary. There seems to be an element of where the player wants to go, though. It seemed like there were some whispers he didn't want to go to certain markets. I know Boston was mentioned as one of them. Early on, it was the Cardinals. I don't know if he came around on that, and I would disagree. I think that's a great place for any player to play. Long, storied history, great fan base. But apparently he didn't want to go to the Cardinals. I think they can offer a better package. As for the upgraded San Francisco offer that we saw the other day with Helio Ramos leading, I really think that makes a big difference. To me, Ramos was one of the better prospects, one of the higher ceilings of any of the players in the draft, was super young. I know if you look at the underlying stats, there was some stuff that jumps out to you, the 500 batting average on balls in play, of course, and the 30% plus strikeout rate. So there are some red flags there, but once again, this guy was 17 years old, one of the youngest players in the draft, and really was one of the better players in the AZL league when he was there. There's power, there's speed. I think that's a much more upgraded package. I think that Tyler Beede, who's a player I'm very familiar with, I've followed him all the way since high school, grew up in the next town over from where I live. So I'm very familiar with what he throws. He had a really bad 2017. He's more of a back-end starter. Might get a little bit of a boost in terms of fantasy value when he's in Miami. But at this point, I think they're just looking at bodies and players that can potentially be controlled. I like Chris Shaw's power output. He's a little bit of a softball player. He's not maybe a little bit more athletic than a Justin Bour, but very similar in what I think ultimately his stat line could be. And who was the fourth player that they were throwing into that deal that I'm totally drawing a blank on now?
There have been so many packages.
Arroyo was in there at one point.
Did they roll him out?
Arroyo was in the most recent one, and I'm not a big Arroyo fan, but I do think they can be a replacement level sort of major league player. Can play a few different spots in the infield. None of them really all that well between second, shortstop, and third. I think his batting average ultimately long term will be about 280. He's that kind of a hitter. I know he didn't show that in his cup of coffee. He got injured, but he had a couple hot weeks. He's an okay player, not a guy that's really fantasy relevant outside of the deepest leagues. But I could see as a major league organization, he's a major league player. He's at least a guy that should be on your roster.
Yeah, it seems to me that the Marlins are more intent on dumping the salary. So if you're getting all these players back, while Ramos may have legit star upside, even though it's years away, you're still getting something else the Marlins need as a throw-in, which is depth for the organization. So, obviously the Cardinals have higher-end prospects that they could offer. So if I had my choice, it would be that. But I would definitely take what the Giants are rumored to be offering. Dan, do you have a quick take on Stanton before we move on to a couple other players?
Well, I think when you talk about the Giants versus the Cardinals could offer more, but I don't think they will offer more than the Giants. I think the Giants are more incentivized to get him just based on where that team is than the Cardinals are. The Giants need more help than the Cardinals do. Yeah, the Cardinals, any team can upgrade with Stanton. That's not the question. But the Cardinals tend to be a fairly careful organization. They don't usually make huge, gigantic, big financial commitments to this level where they're taking on $290 million or whatever it is. And I think the Giants, as a team that just dropped off the face of the earth last year, I think that their window is closing quickly. And there's only a few ways they can keep open that window, and it's getting a Stanton. Because really the other options aren't really that much better, because it isn't like you can just go sign a Stanton in free agency. You can get J.D. Martinez, who has his uses. I can't really see him in the big outfield there, and he's going to cost money too. But I think Stanton is the best move they can make. When you look at him and say, hey, what's our best scenario? It's having Stanton on the team. So at that point you say, well, why are we really valuing these prospects? Prospects are great, but our team, our window is now. And I think that the Giants, say 3 years down the road, they're going to be probably a terrible team whether they keep Beede, whether they keep Arroyo, or whether they don't. So with that thing, it's like, let's focus on now.
Right.
Say our roster is like 75 to 80 wins now. We still need to get up to where we're 85, 86, 87 wins, our roster. If they could get Stanton and Ohtani, that would be a pretty good offseason for them. And it makes them relevant again. Because after last year, it's hard to see. I think they're better than they were last year, but 66 wins is not that good.
I'm glad you brought up the J.D. Martinez thing, because, you look at it, he's basically going to cost you 2/3 of what Stanton costs currently, right? Or at least what he's asking for. And maybe he can
That's what he's asking for. I wouldn't give it to him.
I'm not saying if you'd give it to him or if I'd give it to him, but some team might, after what he's done and his age still and what he's capable of doing. So you're looking at basically 2/3 of what Stanton's contract is. So that little bit extra you're paying for Stanton, he's being very disrespected for the reigning MVP of the National League. Not to mention he does have star power, a lot more of a difference in star power between Stanton and JD Martinez than that third difference you're paying in salary. You also mentioned 2-3 years down the road from now where he has an opt-out. Even if he doesn't opt out, even if he stays in this contract, this might be a bargain 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now of what he's currently making. And it never goes over $32 million annually a year. So it's not even on a yearly basis that bad. It's not like he's jumping up to $40 million at any point. 32 is the highest. It's just the length of it. Do you really trust Stanton at 39 years old or whenever 38, 39, whatever it is when it expires? So I really don't think the contract is nearly as bad as everybody's saying. But you know, for a small market team like the Marlins, who unfortunately had the tragedy that happened with Jose Fernandez, their future plan was completely derailed. They have the new, ownership going on. So their strategy has totally changed from when they signed Stanton to this deal. So I don't have a problem with them unloading him or looking to unload him, but I also don't think this contract is nearly as bad or the albatross that people seem to want to think it is. So I don't know. This is going to continue to have people weigh opinions on, but let's move on to some prospects because a couple people have been asking. Of course, this is Prospect Jesus, the show. So if you don't know, you can check out Ralph's other work on the Razzball Prospect Pod with new host Lance Brodowski, who's basically my son. Looks like Thor, tall, lanky, skinny, Adonis-like with long,
so the opposite of me.
Locks. No, everybody on this show is a handsome fellow.
I once had flowing blonde locks. Now I just have a receding hairline.
Well, it happens.
Or has let himself go.
Lance is, of course, taking over for Mr. Halper, Mike, of course, and Lifshitz was formed, so check out that show as well if you just want audio and you don't want to see the beautiful faces we present you with in stunning high definition each week. But I say all that to tell you this. We are going to do a new segment this season called Jesus Talks, and that will be a segment where Ralph breaks down one particular prospect that has randomly been chosen by myself from what you submit to us throughout the week. We're not doing that this week, but we are going to talk about Jose Siri, Hunter Green, and it was going to be Helio Ramos, but Ralph already elaborated on him a little.
I guess I did, yeah. Sorry.
So, no, that's fine. But I'm going to start with you, Dan, and I'm going to ask you about Hunter Green because we were talking about, all these two-way players with Ohtani, and of course McKay was involved, part of this draft class as well. But Hunter Green could have won number 1 overall, didn't. What's your take with Hunter Green, and how do you see him projecting going forward? Are you a fan of Hunter Green?
Well, I am. I mean, he's very talented. He has a lot of the tools. The statistics obviously don't say a lot at this point. So projections, we just kind of push him to the side. You're not going to know that much about a 17-year-old from, what was it, 1 month in rookie ball. Excuse me, sorry. I do think, I personally, I would be as aggressive trying to keep him as a hitter and a pitcher as long as possible. I think for any prospect, especially one with a lot of talent, I think you start out with all the possibilities in front of you. And you only want to shut the door on some of those possibilities when they prove that they cannot. I talked about this a lot with Luis Severino before last season, how people were so quick to wanting him to be in the bullpen and to just give up on him in the rotation. People were very quick about that. And I said, well, don't you want to see if he can be a starter before you just equivocally just say, no, you're a reliever now? And I think that when you start limiting a player's boundaries that quickly, I think you kind of lose out on some of the really special talent. Like we're talking about Ohtani. I think you want to explore him as a pitcher, as a hitter. Maybe he doesn't hit well in the majors compared to Japan. Maybe he underperforms what the projections say. But you have to find that out. And I think with Hunter Green or anyone like that, I said the same thing about with Brooks Kieschnick, 20 years ago now? God. I think that you want to give your top talent as much room to be that top talent as possible. So don't limit the possibilities. Let him hit, let him pitch, see what happens.
Got it. I'm going to transition to we're running out of time here because obviously we had that long break in between, but thank you for staying with us and bearing with us. it's been asked in the chat. I haven't had a chance to go back and forth as much tonight with the chat, but what is behind me is Team Fraser Fur. So some people will get that inside reference. I know the tree has been a popular topic in the chat tonight. Ralph, if you don't have anything profound to add about Hunter Green tonight, I'm sure we're going to get into him plenty in the coming weeks. If you don't have anything profound to offer right now, I want you to attack Jose Siri, and not attack him personally, but attack, obviously, what you think of his makeup and breakdown, because these questions are coming from one of our longstanding fans. He's actually not a member of the Crab Army, but he is a member of the baseball show, and that's Jose Plaza, and he has been asking daily about Jose Siri and what to make of this. And I think a lot of people are, because he put up some decent numbers and kind of a surprise. I personally don't think he's going to amount to much of anything. I think, he's repeated levels well, but they're still low levels. And he's also, a few years above the majority of players he's playing with at those low levels. So I personally don't, I'm not running out to make it a huge investment in Jose Siri, but of course, I'm sure now Ralph is going to chime in and tell me how foolish I am and how Jose Siri needs to be owned everywhere.
No, but I will say, we'll go into it in a minute. I think I agree with you in some places. The one thing I want to say about Hunter Green is great mechanics. I think we have to wait. Don't look at the numbers. Don't read into stuff too much. Don't read into the videos you've seen in Instructs, other than how well this guy delivers the ball, how good his mechanics are, and how easy that velocity is. As for Jose Siri, he's a really interesting prospect because this guy reached a 2040 level in terms of homers, plus the steals were 40 plus. He had one of the longer hitting streaks of all time in the minor leagues this year. I forget how many games exactly he went. I know it wasn't as long as Francisco Mejia's last season, but it was relatively long. But there's some stuff in his profile I don't love. He doesn't walk a ton. He'll strike out a little bit. Very fly ball heavy, very pull heavy for a guy with the speed that he has. Not a really high line drive rate. Usually those elite guys that are making really, really hard contact in the minor leagues, at least, it translates to at least a 20% plus line drive rate. I don't see that with Siri. But that said, this is a guy that had 20 homers and had 40 steals. Now, I know it was in the Midwest League, which is low A or full season A ball, depending upon how much of a douchebag you are on Reddit and how much you want to bust Andy's balls about the difference between low A or full season A ball. But it was the Midwest League. He's 22 years old. So he was very old for the level. There's that. But I don't want to completely write off a player like this, because with baseball, players progress. Players make changes. They figure things out. They make tweaks to their batting stance. They make tweaks to their swing, their launch angle. We saw all that stuff happen this year, even at the major league level with older players. So I'm not going to write off this season. He was very good statistically. The numbers were awesome. He was not a top 100 prospect for me, but I do think he's a player that in dynasty leagues of, 120 players or more that are owned, if you took a shot on him at the end of your draft, I don't think that's a big deal. And those are relatively shallow dynasty leagues. In deep dynasties, he needs to be on.
Fair enough. We're going to jump into the final segment here. For everybody that says I'm talking over Ralph, if you go back and you time out every segment and sequence of what we do here, Ralph probably talks more than myself and the guests. Maybe not tonight, but normally more than myself and the guests combined. I'm just kidding, Dan. We have fun here. We like to troll our guests as well as each other, obviously. I'm going to ask you each hit or miss on Justin Smoke, just a hit or a miss. You buying into the bounce back? This guy's been a long thought of high-level prospect who's never panned out. He finally did something in 2017. Do you think he can capture that again, Ralph? Yes or no?
Yeah, there were relatively drastic improvements in his batted ball profile. He
was a yes
he
or
was
no
much
question.
more patient. Yes, I think he can. I don't know if he's going to hit 40 homers, but I think he can have a very good season.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm going to get it in the comments now for stepping all over you again. Dan, yes or no, Justin Smoke?
You're not going to let me hedge, are you? You're not going to let me say 75% yes. Okay, I think...
See?
Oh, I'm a hedger. I like to hedge. I like to take the middle ground. Okay, I'm filibustering my answer while I try to decide which side I'm closer on. I'm going to say I'm closer to the hit side. I think he did make significant improvements. In a lot of ways, 2017 was kind of the year of the disappointing 2010 first base prospect, because it wasn't just Smoke. Eric Hosmer had one of his best years. Yonder Alonso had a great year. Logan Morrison did. These were all the guys that were kind of around in 2010, and then they just kind of were okay. But I think a lot of the improvement was real. Smoke's conditioning was much better than it had been in past seasons. So he wasn't like a guy who you could say, oh, he just started hitting fly balls like Yonder Alonso did when he thought of it. But I do think that a lot, maybe most of the improvement will stick around. The Blue Jays need it because they're, yeah.
All right. Well, again, it was a yes or no question, so I'll go.
I did
yes.
say yes in the end, though.
You know,
but
we're fantasy baseball experts. We don't give yes or no answers. We give context.
Well,
you have to woo and build up the
exactly
the whole
the sizzle.
foreplay thing. Yeah, you can say
there's also a certain level of respect that you two gentlemen in particular have earned, that a simple yes or no should be enough for people to say, I'm going with it. Because Dan or Ralph said yes. So there you go. That's it.
People will think that if I say a one-word answer, that someone has like my family hostage or something. Because I don't. When I was 4, my godmother dubbed me Constant Comment because I commented on everything. I was a snarky, cynical little kid.
Yes.
Like all the kids the teachers kind of hated me because in kindergarten, I was the kid where kids learned about things that they weren't old enough to learn about from. I was the one, not their parents, that told kids in kindergarten that there was no Santa Claus, no tooth fairy, when they die, they slowly rot in a coffin, how babies were made. I was that kid. When I asked my grandfather when I was 4 what happened when you die, he gave me a book to read on putrefaction. So I was that kid. So I will never say the yes no answer. I will say the answer, hopefully the right one, in the most obnoxious way possible, which isn't just yes or no.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted me to go on, then I might have just said, sure, hit. It's a hit.
I'm gonna have to take this out again.
I think that's.
We're gonna have to move on to another segment.
Oh, come on! I want to tell my story about when I was 8 and when I asked my father where we went when we died. He told me I became the salt we used to melt the snow, and my mind was blown. And I was like, "There's no heaven." And that's when I found out my father didn't believe in God. It was kind of awesome.
Or heaven makes you into salt.
Yeah, you just become shit you throw on salt. I mean snow.
All right.
Like, what is it? Lot's wife, Job's wife, someone's wife turned to salt. I don't remember though.
Ralph is known for straying from the direct topics that were asked. So we're going to stray from this. Ralph is frozen. No, Ralph doesn't stray. I've defended Ralph all day.
I'm frozen now?
Answer me.
I didn't realize how sensitive Cubs fans were. Like I'm like a contrarian. Like I grew up a Red Sox fan. I'm from Boston, but I'm like a contrarian Red Sox fan. So I constantly bust the balls of Red Sox fans. And I got to tell you, they are significantly less sensitive than Cubs fans right now about Theo Epstein. Oh my God! Like there are people I'm pretty sure that wanted me like kicked off of Twitter for the things I said about Theo Epstein today. I just said he was good.
Now that was a fun Twitter thread. I stayed out of it because you see what happens is I create enough trouble for myself without wading into. Last year this Royals fan was just sending me all these nasty tweets, and then he just tells me to delete my account. So I told him delete your DNA, and he starts flipping out about how I want him and his family to die, and I'm like, no, just you. And of course. Thankfully, I wasn't kicked off Twitter, but that wasn't my brightest moment.
Well,
but I still stand by it.
Well, apparently everybody's frozen but me, and so basically the cameras are like, basically the Yankees of baseball would be my camera, the only thing that works. So Matt Thompson is here for the Theo Love Fest. Let's get into that. Anybody want to get into that? Let's get an FMK. We haven't done an FMK all year. This is only the second episode so far. Go for it. Dan, we do FMKs on this. I'm saying SMK because I'm looking at your last name on the screen.
It's Matt Lauer's. It's Matt Lauer's favorite game, apparently. That was my favorite part.
I thought his favorite game was locking the door when people were in his office.
No, that's real life stuff. That's real life stuff. That's real life stuff. No, okay. he likes, but he liked to play marry, fornicate, kill, as we like to say.
Fornicate,
or you can say fuck.
Yeah.
It's up to you. It's up to you if you want to say fuck or not. I'll say it.
I'm a sophisticated person. I will call it fornication.
You're gonna call it fornicate. All right, that's fine by me.
Murray Chats called me the digital dandy. I have to be above.
You got to be dandy. You got to be dandy. Yes. So why don't we do a GM one? Why don't we do Jeff Lunau of the Astros? We'll do Theo Epstein of the Cubs, and we'll do Brian Cashman of the Yankees. Marry, fornicate, and kill. I'm gonna throw it over to Dan first because we know what Andy's gonna say.
You know I have press access, so if anyone sees this, it could be pretty awkward. I think I'd marry Theo Epstein. I think he would manage my household in a way that I don't very well. I mean, I lost a pork chop the other day somewhere in a plastic bag. I have not found it yet. I think maybe a cat ate it, but I don't know where it is. It might be in the basement somewhere when I was down there doing laundry. I don't know. I think he managed the Cubs well. I think he could clean up my office a little. I have a lot of glasses and beer bottles and cans and dishes and stuff, and the cleaning lady only comes every 2 weeks. I guess kill, it would have to be Brian Cashman simply because I'm an Orioles fan, and it's really frustrating to have a GM that is good that works for the Yankees, that actually has long-term thinking. Like, you know, as an analyst, their little rebuilding thing last year, I guess, is it still considered, 2016, their little rebuilding phase at the end of the year, that was something they needed to do, and that was something that I was pushing for them to do as an analyst. But as an Orioles fan, I didn't want them to do that. I wanted them to trade and say, "Oh, we're gonna make this. We're gonna get the wild card. Let's not trade anybody." That's what I wanted them to do. So I would prefer that they have some crazy guy who makes. I want the Yankees to have Ruben Amaro as the GM. That's what I want. So Cashman has to go, and I guess it just leaves Jeff Lunau, which I guess is pretty awkward if I run into him. So by process of elimination. I guess we're gonna be pretty close.
I love the fact you said when you came back when the video rejoined, you were redder. So somebody said you are frozen and on fire at the same time, which was.
You see, the problem is I have a fairly ruddy complexion to begin with, and I don't know why. Because this is the Edge version of it. Why Edge is making me redder than. I do. I'm looking at it right now. I'm all white and red. I look like I'm a clown.
You're good. You're good. It's. Listen, this is live.
If I had green hair, I'd be in a sewer, trying to lure children in to kill them. Hopefully, people get the reference, and it doesn't just sound like I'm confessing to something horrible.
No. I got the reference.
Everything floats down here.
To watch it for a while, but
it's going to you, Andy. What do you say?
You have to say. I said
FMK.
You had Epstein. Was it Epstein, Lunau, and Cashman?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And you said, I think you know where I'm going with Cashman. You'd be wrong. I'm killing Cashman, so the position is open and available that I, can throw my hat into the running. Like I am currently involved in New York Giants GM talks and negotiations. I am a candidate for the Giants open GM position. I don't know if you guys know. I tweeted out to the Maras, I am available, and Ernie Accorsi. So I am officially in the consideration. Epstein, I would marry. I've long been a fan of Theo Epstein, which is kind of why it pained me to sit back and watch you get into everybody's mentions today, because I happen to think Theo Epstein is great. I thought when he went to Chicago, he was going to break the mold, and he did. And I like the guy, so I would have to marry him. And Lunau, I guess I'm killing him. I guess it's a one-nighter with him if I'm killing Cashman.
All right. Well, my answer is this. So I'm going to marry Jeff Lunau, and the reason I'm going to marry Jeff, I'm a small market team, and the only way that I'm going to be, Did you lose me?
No, you're here.
He froze on my screen.
You're frozen, but I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. My screen just froze. I should be.
Now you disappeared
Good
again.
now.
And now you disappeared.
I disappeared again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, can you hear me at least? Can you at least hear me?
Again. We hear you.
I see a silhouette of him, like a gray and white silhouette. That's kind of having.
That's what was happening before with you. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll make him answer the question so he can't like use this as an out.
Okay. Answer the question, and then we're gonna wrap. Ralph, go. Quick. Ralph, are you there? Even this thing's not working. Ralph, are you there? Ralph, answer the question. All right, Ralph is gone. All right, I guess we're going to have to tweet out what his FMK was. Dan, I don't even know how to quickly adjust your camera to get you in, so nobody even can see you right now. Let me see.
I'm sure that no one's going, oh, I can't see his large head.
I am.
No, but if you can, well...
No, I'm upset by this, but anyway, it was a pleasure having you on. This was fun for all that attended and watched. We will continue to work on the production qualities. Hopefully there was a step up this week. We did start on time. We did have Dan Szymborski, of course, Zips Projections, ESPN, Fantrax. You can catch him all over talking great stuff on baseball. Follow him on Twitter. He's a great follow. A lot of fun. Great guest tonight as well. Gave some very good and in-depth answers, I will say. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel right here, Fantrax. Give the thumbs up if you like the video. Leave your comments. What else can I tell you? Follow everybody on Twitter, Prospect Jesus, People's Pen, and D. Szymborski. Next week's guest will be Chris Kusiolik. You can follow him on Twitter at Cali Kusiolik. He is a minor league hound on the backfield, so we'll get into a lot of stuff with him and Prospect Jesus. And any additional questions you have, leave them in the comments or ask him on Twitter. Thank you for...
Yeah, I do answer questions on Twitter. I am very talkative.
Yes, he will answer your questions, and so will Ralph and myself. So hopefully we'll see you on Twitter. We'll see you next week, and hope you enjoyed tonight. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you later.